All right, so make sure that we're live here so that the people. Tuesday, I have a court hearing that I cannot get out of. I have attempted in every way, shape, or form. I know to move it, but the court has said they're not going to move it because the other counsel can't find another time. And so I have to be somewhere else. So I have posted a video for you to watch on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we will have a completely virtual class. There are two videos that you may watch. You can choose either one. There's one that's listed on D2L under the content tab. I reviewed both of the videos. That one has more interaction with me and the students, and it's a little bit harder to hear as a result of their talking. So I posted another one in a email on the D2L through the D2L email. I've given you a link to one that is just primarily me lecturing and less of my discussion with students in class, because that was taken in the big lecture hall. So that one may be easier. So that one will cover segmenting, targeting, and positioning, which I'm a little sad about because that's actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, but it can't be helped. I did not get through global in my other class, so that's going to be a little bit of a problem. So at any rate, we won't have class face-to-face or live streamed on Tuesday. It will be a virtual class session. You should watch the videos and read the book. I apologize immensely for this. If I could get somebody to cover my classes, I would, but I would have to get somebody to cover both, and I can't seem to get one of my colleagues that's willing to get up and take an 8 a.m. class. I don't understand what the problem is, because I'm up at 5 a.m. every day. And so, I think that we used to teach classes. I think I told you this. We used to teach classes at 7 a.m. here, and they were full. And I really like that time slot, but I'm told that students anymore just will not come to a 7 a.m. class. And I'm like, well, if it's the only class they need it, if you offer mandatory classes, and that's the only section, I think they'll show up. But apparently my colleagues disagree. I liked 7 a.m. classes. I thought they were great. Most people don't. So since you just walked in on class, on Tuesday we'll have a virtual class. There's a video that you should watch for that class because I have to be in court on that day. I apologize for that. If you feel cheated in any way, shape, or form by that, you let me know, and I will call you and I will talk calmly and softly to you for a length of time to assure you that you know everything about segmenting, targeting, and positioning that you need to know. I'm happy to do that. I've never had anybody take me up on this offer, but eventually I'm sure that I'll get a taker who wants me to call and talk to them about what I would have lectured about in class. But there's the video. There's two videos out there that you can watch, either one, which if you want to see how the class has worked in the past, where I've had group work, you might want to watch the one that's under the content tab. If not, the other one that I posted is primarily or more of me lecturing than the one that has me talking. So we were talking last time about characteristics of business-to-business marketing. We talked about quality specifications, and I gave you an example of quality specifications in terms of the specifications that you have to get to have a product marketed in primary and secondary education in a textbook, and how that can be different. And so, generally speaking, I would think that, for example, in the homeschool market, so there's a large homeschool market. Epic Charter Schools, for example, is one of these that provides homeschooling. I imagine they're not looking at necessarily whether or not we're talking about layer cake and marble cake. And if you were homeschooling your kid, you probably wouldn't think about that specification either. But the California Curriculum Committee decided that was what they were going to hang their hat on. We're talking about delivery schedules. Time is of the essence. Clauses become really important. So if you're doing just-in-time inventory control, in many instances, what we do now is product comes into a manufacturer and it doesn't sit around in a warehouse for long periods of time. It is instantly used really, really quickly in the manufacturing process, and then it's shipped out very quickly. It doesn't just sit around. There aren't these huge warehouses that are full. And in fact, if we talk about wholesaling and retailing, in wholesaling, a lot of times things will be cross-docked. So they'll come in to a warehouse, they'll be broken down by the wholesaler very quickly, and they'll be shipped out cross-docked on a truck that's going to a retailer in order to get that product there and keep it from having to be stored for long periods of time. The COVID-19 crisis has really messed up this system. When a lot of people had to be off and a lot of factories and things were shut down, it has really affected these, and there will be some interesting studies, I think, that come out of this kinds of thing. So time is of the essence clauses, regulatory and environmental issues, just-in-time inventory control, those all become very important. Whereas for you, if your computer breaks down, if this computer breaks down, we have to have replaced. When the camera up there stopped working the other day, and it was focused just on this station over here and wouldn't move and allow me to show the board, that's a major problem, right? For us. For you, as an individual consumer, if it doesn't work, that's not necessarily such a big thing. If the computer in this classroom, it has got to be replaced rapidly and efficiently. Whereas, you know, if your laptop breaks, you're probably going to spend some time thinking about it and going and trying out new laptops and stuff like that. Whereas in the business-to-business segment, we don't. I mean, having a computer down in the classroom could mean can't because their stuff is not there. So we're having to figure out a way. So it becomes really, time is of the essence, becomes really critical. The technical capabilities that are required. So for example, for UCO's D2L, we had to be able to make sure that when we went to a new learning management system that their product is going to integrate with what we have in terms of our servers and our products and what we're using on campus. And so technical capabilities become a major concern. Whereas for you, you know, again, if we're talking about computers, you sort of buy a package and a suite of products and you don't really worry about the technical specifications. Whereas we're going to have to worry about not just one computer, but how it's going to integrate and interface among a whole variety of computers and an external constituency in terms of students using their own computers and how it's going to go across this device here when you log on. So that's going to be important. Warranties. For most things that you buy, other than a car, you probably don't think about the warranties. Now, when you bought a car, you probably did think about the warranty, right? And you probably looked and saw, does it have any warranty left, or do I need to buy an extended warranty plan, things like that. It really is very critical in the business world to think about these warranties. Most products have what's called, or all products have what's called, unless it's a specialty manufactured product, an implied warranty of merchantability. So for those of you that are on the extended class, you can't see this, but I am holding, or I am touching a chair right here. This has what's called an implied warranty of merchantability, which means that it's reasonably fit for the ordinary purpose to which it would become used, right? Which means that as long as I'm sitting in it, if it breaks and I get hurt, you can sue the manufacturer for that, because that's the ordinary purpose. You don't really think about things like that, but we do in the business world. We think about what are the warranties and what are the limitations of those warranties, and it becomes really important that we read. So, for example, the fine print of those contracts and those warranties. How many of you have a warranty in your car? Nobody in here has a warranty on their car. Everybody's car is out of warranty. Some of you probably don't know whether or not your car is out of warranty. Do you know what that warranty covers? You know, is it a bumper to bumper? Is it a powertrain? What does that mean? Well, in a business context where it's more sophisticated, we're going to know what those means. Past performance and course of dealings. These become interesting in the business environment because relationships are generally longer, and it also is going to go to whether or not we can enforce certain provisions of a contract. So this morning I was using example of Reese's peanut butter cups, and I'll use that in here as well because that's the only candy that I really like. I'm not a sweets person. If it was between candy bar and steak, I will always choose the steak and baked potato over the candy bar every day. Most people are not like that. Most people are carb addicts. And so they would choose the candy bar, right? Because they like the sweets. But the one candy bar that I do like are Reese's peanut butter cups. The peanut butter that comes in the Reese's peanut butter cups, I'm going to imagine, and I'm reasonably certain about this, although I haven't done extensive research on it, is different than the Reese's or than the peanut butter that you get in the Jiffy peanut butter jar, right? So for example, what happens to peanut butter if you leave it in the jar, if you don't eat an enormous amount of peanut butter? And this happens in my household frequently because I'll buy a jar of peanut butter. I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches if I'm going to have that kind of thing, but I don't eat them very often. I probably eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich once a year. Yeah, it's something that I'm working outside. It's fast. I'm hungry. I got to go get something, and I'll eat a peanut butter and jelly. So you have this jar of Jif or what are some of the other ones? Jiffy or Peter Pan or Skippy is another brand of peanut butter. And you leave that peanut butter on the shelf for, say, a month or two. What happens to the peanut butter when you go to get it?
I mean, there's that like oil.
There's that film of oil, right, on the top of the peanut butter, and you have to kind of stir the peanut butter up and get that. And it really occurs if you use natural peanut butter, like some of the stores, Whole Foods and things like that have this peanut butter manufacturing machine that you can get your own freshly made peanut butter, and it will have a lot of peanut oil in it. That's not going to work real well for Reese's peanut butter cups, is it? Right? The peanut butter cup if it starts pooling oil, it's going to affect the chocolate that's above that peanut butter. And so there's a grade of peanut butter that they use, I imagine. I'm relatively certain, again, I haven't done extensive, that's different than what you get maybe for consumer use, right? Now, if I'm a manufacturer of peanut butter and I send, let's call that peanut butter that they use for the Reese's peanut butter cup, grade A peanut butter. We'll just give it a generic term because we've seen all kinds of, grade A ketchup, right? Or fancy ketchup is actually a technical term for the quality of the ketchup, right? So grade A peanut butter. And I say, because of manufacturing defect, we had one of our processors go down that basically takes out more of the oil from that peanut butter. I'm only going to be able to ship you grade B peanut butter, and you accept that, and you do it numerous times, and then let's say on the fourth or fifth time that I do this, you say you violated the contract. A court is going to look at this and say, oh no, you've got a course of dealing here, where you've accepted grade B peanut butter or whatever over this course of dealing, and that can be important, right? So production facilities and capacity. When you bought your car, you didn't go to Ford's plant in Detroit, Michigan, or wherever your car was manufactured, or GM or Mercedes or whatever it is that you drive, and look at the way it was manufactured. In the business-to-business environment, people will. They will go and make sure that you have the capabilities. If you're an unknown provider, we would have school districts that would come to our offices when I was in the private sector. That would they would come and look at our facilities and meet with our programmers to be able to ensure and meet with they would come to our facility and meet with our course designers to ensure that we could provide them with the content and the specifications that they required to meet their standards for whatever it was that they were doing. You don't do that, but they do in the business-to-business environment. And that makes it a different kind of sell. When we talk about professional selling, what you'll find is that oftentimes with regard to these, we engage in selling in teams. It's not just a salesman like you have on a car lot, but you'll have a team of salespeople. So you'll have the salesperson who actually goes out and makes the contact, but then it will consist of, for example, when we would sell, we had a sales vice president that would go out. I would go out after he'd made the contact and talk to school boards, for example, as part of the team on how to do a sole source contract, so that we could get around the requirements that you go out for a bid and an RFP. It would involve one of our VPs, usually from product development, and then also one of our web or one of our programmers to talk about the technical capacity. So it was really a team effort, not just a one person. Whereas if you go buy a car, you're probably just going to deal with one salesperson. Unless that salesperson gets sick in the middle of it, you're going to deal with one person, and that's pretty much it. Whereas in the business world, you're oftentimes going to have a team that's involved in the sale of the product. The relationships are usually long-term. When we bid, for example, years and years and years ago, I did this study when I was a political scientist of what does it cost to change a light bulb? And I used UCO as my basis, just as a sort of a way, and I did a little paper on it, and a sort of a little presentation at a regional conference about what does it cost to change a light bulb. So let's suppose the light bulbs go out in this building. Well, at home, what do I do to change a light bulb? Well, I may go to, there are 2 big stores in Guthrie that sell light bulbs, although there are more, right? There's a Cash Saver, which is right down the street from my house, and there's a Walmart Supercenter. There's also an Ace Hardware. Some of the little convenience stores sell light bulbs. I could go source the light bulbs from a variety of places. That's not the way we do it. We buy light bulbs in bulk. We send out RFPs generally for a year, and we buy all of our source of light bulbs from that supplier. If the light bulbs go out in this classroom, what do you think? And this, I did the study back in the 90s. I figured out what it would cost to change a light bulb. Well, I can't just get up on the ladder and change these light bulbs in here. Can I? No, the physical plant is not going to let me go over and grab a ladder from, right? Because this is a workers' comp disaster waiting to happen. So I can't just go grab the light bulb, change the light bulb. So I had to, at that time, I had to tell my administrative assistant, there's a light bulb out in my classroom. What is that? Well, she would then have to type up a work order. That work order would be sent through the campus mail, which meant that somebody had to sort it. Right, so this is taking time, so they have to pick it up in the building that it's at. They would have to take it over to the central mail room, and they would sort it. They would sort between, so they pick up both campus mail and outgoing mail, and then they would have to sort it. All of the stuff that stayed internal, they would sort, and then they would send it out the next day to the department that it was going to go to. Somebody at the work order desk would have to pick that up. A work order clerk would have to pick that up, enter that work order, process it, send somebody out to change the light bulb. And it turned out at that point in time, I think what I discovered was it cost about $100 to change the light bulb in the classroom. So these relationships, we buy our light bulbs, we send an RFP for this kind of thing out. We buy our light bulbs, we buy them from one source. If I want to change my light bulb at home, I'm going to go to who has the cheapest, the fastest, the most convenient light. That's not the way we do it. So it's a long-term relationship generally. If you can get a government contract, it's at least usually for a year. Whereas if I need light bulbs, I'm not necessarily committed to Walmart. I'm not necessarily committed to Cash Saver. I might be coming back from Guthrie, or I might be going home to Guthrie and pass by Sam's. And remember that I need light bulbs. That's not the way it's done. So the relationships are long-term. There's formalized buying. So I used the example of UCO's purchase of an LMS. We used to have different LMSs. So when we first started, in the sort of online course delivery context, we decided, well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to go figure out how to get this stuff online. Well, how do you do that? You do it through a learning management system. We have gone through a number of learning management systems since I've been here at UCO. Usually what happens, there's this company out there called Blackboard. So we started out, I think, with, I don't remember what it was. But anyway, it may have been WebCT or something like that. We started out with this one LMS. Blackboard is infamous. Have any of you gone to a school that uses Blackboard? You've used Blackboard? So Blackboard, I think it's Blackboard, is infamous for doing this. What they do is they go in, there used to be these other LMSs out there. One was called Angel, one was called Canvas, and there were several others. And they're infamous for going in and buying that company and then not supporting the product. They just basically shut the product down by not supporting it, forcing you to then buy Blackboard, right? I think they've done this with WebCT, they did it with Canvas, they did it with Angel. And so we needed a new LMS. I can't remember what it was we had before D2L. It may have been WebCT. But so what do? Well, we go out and we have requests for proposals. Well, how do we develop those? Well, first of all, we're going to look at who are the users. The primary user of the LMS is me, because I'm the one that's going to populate the LMS with my stuff. So professors. But there are also influencers. There are staff and students who have to use this and have to implement it. The technical support people that have to do this. You all have to use it. So those are influencers. at UCO. There are actual buyers in the purchasing department who are part of this process, who ultimately can decide what's bought and purchased at UCO. And then there are these sort of gatekeepers that monitor this stuff. So when we start deciding that we need a new LMS, because Blackboard has shut down the current LMS, we've decided we're just not going to go with Blackboard. We're going to do an RFP. We send out a request for proposal. Those are public. Those are put together by people, the gatekeepers in purchasing, the administrative assistants, and the clerks. We get to a committee that comes, so the professors come and they say, what do we need in terms of an LMS? Well, there are sort of front end, right? There are interface issues that we need as professors, but then there are also technical. So we have to involve IT in that. So the professors need to say things like, I need to be able to put in content. I need to be able to use, I mean, it's gone from, I started teaching online 20-something odd years ago, 25 years ago, something like that, in the early days. And at that point in time, it was very basic. Basically, online education was a glorified version of correspondence. It was largely done by email, you know, and not an LMS email. It was done by the whatever email system we were having. And it was basically like a correspondence course. So we've got to have a grade book. We've got to have a place to put content. We've got to have communication in that. These are sort of the things that I need. Then the technical people say, well, you know, this is what our servers can handle, and this, you know, all of these things. And so you put all of this together, and then understanding if you're selling this product, who actually has the decision-making authority? Well, at UCO, there are only two people. It may have expanded because they split one of these departments, but for historically, there were only two people that could actually authorize a purchase over $5,000 on this campus. I'm not one of them. The second in command, so on a college campus, it's sort of like Animal Farm. In Animal Farm, all pigs are equal, except some pigs are more equal than others, right? All vice presidents are equal, not necessarily. There's one that's sort of the principal vice president, and that's called the provost. The vice president for academic affairs is the provost, and they are, because we're an academic institution, on almost every single campus, they're the second in command. But they have no purchasing authority of anything over $5,000. The vice president for administration, who historically has been a notch below the provost, is the only person on campus, and the president, who can sign for a purchase of that size, right? Because it's millions of dollars. So when you are in marketing, you have to understand, and sales, who is it that actually makes the decision? These other people are all important, but who is it that can actually write the check to you? You want to get paid. Who is it that actually does that? Well, do they really have much control of the process? Does the president actually care what LMS we have? I don't think they do, right? I don't think that the vice president for administration actually cares what we have, but they're technically the only ones that have the power to do this. So buying situations are gonna predicate what kind of marketing and sales we have to do. Is this a new buy? If it's a new buy, like when we first got into the online education business, that was when we first bought our first LMS here at UCO. That involved an enormous amount of research, as opposed to if we are just re-upping our subscription, right? So we've got D2L now. The switching costs are pretty great if we decide we don't like D2L. So we're probably at the end of the 5-year, 10-year, whatever it is period that we've signed up for, we may just go ahead, and if D2L is still around, just rebuy it. And that won't involve nearly as much stuff as it would if we were going back to that rebuy, to that new buy. Or is it a modified rebuy? Has Blackboard come in? Now we know all about LMSs. We know basically what it's going to take to have an LMS. This is going to be a modified rebuy, but Blackboard's come in, let's say, and bought up D2L, and they've shut it down. What are we going to have to do now? Well, this is a modified. So there's a change in specifications, price, delivery, and it may be more than a straight rebuy, but not as much as the new buy situation in terms of the amount of time and effort that we're going to have to expend on this. So the stages in the business-to-business buying process are the same or similar to those that we saw in consumer decision-making, but there are more complexity to these decisions because generally it involves not one person. Now, we say in consumer decision-making it only involves one, but generally, in many instances, if it's a big purchase, it involves more than that. So if you have an insignificant other, a wife, a husband, whatever that you live with, if you're gonna buy a home, it's probably gonna involve more than one person, but it's still gonna be limited to one or two or something like that. You're probably not gonna have 20 people putting in their input on whether or not you should buy the home. Whereas at UCO, we probably are. So there's gonna be a lot of people involved once we recognize that we've got a problem as an institution. Once we saw that this landscape was changing, there's this thing called the internet out there. People are starting to use it for educational purposes, which, by the way, the internet was developed for educational purposes, but it was developed for scientists to be able to communicate effectively. But once it starts going into basically being a tool for education as well, we start to recognize this. There are other universities that are out there, and we're going to lose a competitive advantage if we don't start using this and start marketing. And I think we've been kind of late to the game because we didn't have a completely fully online, for example, business degree until I think last year was the first year that we launched the fully online business degree. But we started recognizing this. We got all these people involved. The information search is going to be far more sophisticated than it is in the business to consumer environment because of the number of people that we have involved in this process, right? We've got faculty, we've got staff, we've got students, we've got all of these constituents that we have to meet. And so the information search is going to be more sophisticated and more formal, usually. It involves, in big organizations, requests for proposals, formal requests where they submit these things out and people then bid on those. Generally speaking, there are fewer suppliers. We saw this with regard to COVID-19. Most of you have never thought about this, but in the early stages of the COVID-19 panic, what were some of the things that you didn't get regularly at the store anymore? And it seemed like, what's going on? Well, toilet paper. How many of you remember experiencing a toilet paper shortage in COVID-19? Well, the reason there was a shortage was A, for two reasons. One, people started hoarding it. And B, most people spend 8 to 12 hours of their day at work, right? Even though your work day is only 8 hours, you spend 12 because you might eat lunch there, but you're out. And so commercial toilet paper is what most people use, during the day. All of a sudden you have people at home. Well, you think, well, why can't the commercial manufacturers of toilet paper, aren't they the same as the people who manufacture toilet paper for your house? They're not. There are far fewer of them, and they can't just switch their plant from manufacturing these huge rolls of commercial toilet paper to manufacturing Charmin. That's not the way it works. And so there was this disruption in the supply chain. So there's usually, like, if we're buying toilet paper, whereas you have lots of alternatives for toilet paper. You can go and you can get Charmin, you can get Angel Soft, you can get the Great Value brand. What else is there?
Cottonelle.
Huh?
Cottonelle.
Cottonelle, right? There's all these varieties of toilet paper. There's like 3 or 4 manufacturers of toilet paper in the United States that manufacture for commercial facilities. So there was this excess in supply all of a sudden of commercial toilet paper and not enough consumer toilet paper. And so there's generally fewer supplies. We can't just choose from as many. We can't just put rolls of Cottonelle. They will not work in the toilet paper holders that we have, right? So the purchasing decision is usually longer. It can take months or years. When we first bought our first LMS here at UCO, I think it took over a year and a half to get that, if I recall correctly. And the post-purchase decision, so you evaluate whether or not, like, oh my God, I went to Taco Bell, it was absolutely horrible. I'm never going to eat there again. Or I went to Long John Silver's, that was the greasiest fish I've ever had in my entire life. We have a much more formalized and sophisticated buying process. Now, the one caveat that I will say is that when we talk about business to business, in many instances, a lot of small businesses act more like consumers, right? So you do have to recognize that. But with regard to larger or more sophisticated entities, it's more formalized, more monitored. We think about, is D2L working? How is it working? Is it a great product? You all probably don't recognize it, but D2L is a horrible product. I can tell you as a professor who has used many learning management systems and who worked for a company that developed learning management systems, D2L it's absolutely the most horrific product I've ever used. I mean, it's just absolutely god awful. It's just horrible. So if the administration is listening to my videos, which they probably should be, I hope you recognize it's a horrible product. Tool, again, the devil has many tools. D2L is one of them, along with Chick-fil-A and Starbucks. So let's talk about global markets. Globalization. If you went back in time, even when I started teaching, I wouldn't have paid as much attention to globalization as I do today. But literally, almost every single business is in some way involved in globalization, at least insofar as that the products that we buy and purchase are not manufactured locally anymore, or even nationally anymore. There was a time when you could buy largely American. Now, there's even a lot of controversy because things that say made in America may not necessarily be made in America. They may be assembled in America, but they may not be made in America fully, right? So it's become an enormously important part of the world economy. We now function in a global economy. Even little small businesses that we talked about in here, Heart of Atlanta Motel, where the court determined, and Katzenbach versus McClung, where the court determined that those businesses were involved in interstate commerce. Well, it's no longer just interstate commerce. We're now involved in international and global commerce. And even businesses that don't think about it are involved in this and maybe impacted and influenced. When my family started our business in Guthrie in 1986, we primarily were primarily patronized by people from the Oklahoma City area. And then we started to realize that Wichita was really a boring place, right? We could advertise in Wichita, and Oklahoma City is to Wichita what Dallas is to us. And we started expanding the number of people that we had as clientele. Then we had a little controversy, and my business ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It was covered by CNN, and all of a sudden we had people coming from all over the world to come to our business. If you Google Oklahoma's Most Haunted, it will come up with a travel okay, and our business is the first one that's listed on that site. And so we have people that now come from all over the world to this little tiny podunk town here in the middle of the buckle of the Bible Belt. And so it's really, globalization is important, and it's only going to become more so as we go along, because we can no longer produce all of the stuff that we need on our own. We just don't have the capabilities anymore. And we found that out through COVID, right? When they started shutting things down and the ports started shutting down, it impacted our ability to get, for example, medicine and pharmaceuticals and textiles and all of these things. So, and this is, at the time the textbook was written, it was already old. It says 25 trillion. It's probably far more than that, although I will say that it may have shrunk as a result of the COVID crisis, because what we've seen is that as a result of that crisis, global trade did decrease. But that's a hiccup that I think will be overcome. So it may be slightly less than this now or slightly more, but that's about what it is. 75% is intangible goods. So 25% is in services. That's exactly the opposite of what it was when we talked about the United States. 75% of what we produce in the United States are services. financial, legal, accounting, communication, those kinds of services, and only 25% are goods, tangible things that we can touch, like these ducks, right? These ducks came from China, by the way. I've looked to see where the source of the ducks are. I got the ducks when my mother was going through cancer treatments. We would go to Penn Square Mall after she'd finished with chemo, and we'd walk the mall because she could do that. And there's this duck machine that you can get ducks in, and so we would play the duck game every day. And that's how I came up with the ducks. And I thought, well, that'd be a good thing to as a marker for students to use, so that I remember to give you bonus points, because before that I didn't remember to give bonus points. You'd have to come up, and then people would come back the next time and say, I think I socked last time, but I'm not sure. So it's just easier if I give you something that you have to give me back, right? So these come from China. So these are tangible products. Mostly what we produce in the United States is now intangible products. China is the leading exporter, followed by Germany and the United States, and the US is the leading importer, followed by China and Germany. So it's exactly a reverse order. Things that are important in considering this, if you want to go into global trade, if you want to engage in international business, thinking about things like the GDP of a country. Let's suppose you identify a country that has a need for your product or service. Do they have the ability really to support that? Now, the United States is the largest. We have the largest GDP, which is one of the reasons why our currency is the world's reserve currency. It is the currency that's used in most instances for the trade of goods and services across international boundaries. That largely occurred as a result of the Bretton Woods Accords after World War II, when it was decided that the US would be the world's reserve currency. The British actually wanted, and they fought very hard for them to be the pound sterling, to be the world's reserve currency, but we actually ended up being the world's reserve currency. Will we always be the world's reserve currency, and will we always have the largest GDP? Probably not. Right? China will probably surpass us shortly. Will they instantly overtake us and become the world's reserve currency? I don't think so, not instantly, but probably at some point in time. Somebody's asking, can you add exchange rates and language differences to that? Yes, and I will text back, yes. We will talk about exchange rates and that in just 1 second, but that's a good point to make, and that's part of the things that we have to think about. So the US is the largest economy. We're the world's reserve currency. What backs up the dollar? I ask this in every semester. Now in my first class, they got it right off the bat. So I'll ask in here, what backs up the United States dollar? Gold. No. We went off the gold standard in 1973. So what's the dollar worth? The dollar is worth whatever anybody thinks it's worth. It floats on a world market, which means that you can see what it's worth every single day against other hard currencies like the pound sterling, the Japanese yen, all of those things. So it floats. Richard Nixon floated the dollar in 1973. So what backs it up? The full faith and credit of the United States for whatever that's worth. Right? So it is what we call at this point fiat money. If you think about this really hard, there's nothing it's because people believe that there's something of value there. In the past, before 1973, it was backed up by the gold standard. But in reality, if you think about this from a philosophical standpoint, gold is also a fiat currency because in actuality, the value of it is completely arbitrary. Right? I mean, there was something that backed up the dollar, it was called gold, but the value of gold, although it is a tangible thing, it is completely arbitrary, the value that we assign to gold. Right? So it really is fiat currency. Even if you think about it from a very philosophical standpoint, it's fiat currency, although we thought that precious metal and hard stuff made it more standard, because we set, and that's an arbitrary, by the way, we set what the dollar was to. So a dollar was worth a certain amount of gold. Now, even in 1973, you couldn't go down to the Fed and exchange your dollars for gold, right? You couldn't do that even in 1973, but in theory, so, right? But even gold floats, and by the way, gold has gone up as a result of the financial and crisis as a result of the pandemic and COVID. all of a sudden people are thinking, well, gold is pretty valuable. I think, what is gold? It's at over $2,000 an ounce currently. Got up to over 2,000 an ounce recently. And I think it went back down slightly. Anyway, I'll look in a minute. So the balance of trade, if you import more than you export, you have a deficit. And if you export more than you import, you have a surplus. Is it necessarily bad to have a deficit and a priori good to have a surplus? Well, economists debate this. I would submit to you that basically we've had a net deficit for years and years and years, and our economy is still the largest, right? And China has still not got the number or the GDP that we have. So, you can debate that. But basically, if you have a deficit, you have greater imports than exports. And if you have surplus, you have more exports. There are lots of countries that export more that are still third world countries. Mexico, I think, exports a lot more than they import, and they're still a third world country. I believe that's still the case. It may have changed recently, but. So what gives a nation a competitive advantage? Now, what we have to think about here is historical terms. If you went back to the 19th century and then into the early 20th century, if you looked at lots of countries, they were similarly situated to the United States. So what made the United States all of a sudden become this economic powerhouse and these other countries not become an economic powerhouse? Well, it's really to try and come up with a model that encompasses all of this is maybe problematic, but these are some of the things that Porter identifies as being competitive advantage. And by the way, when I say these comparisons, let's look at things. So what made the United States a wealthy country? Well, lots of people say, well, you had lots of natural resources. Well, lots of countries had lots of natural resources. And if you're just comparing us, for example, to Great Britain, you might think that. So the British, what made us leap up over the British, our founders? Well, the British as a nation, right? The English. So actually, the United Kingdom is comprised of historically sort of 3 states, depending on how you think about it. But there was England, Scotland, and Wales, and now Northern Ireland, right? Those were the states that comprised, and at one point in time, all of Ireland, now Northern Ireland, that comprised the United Kingdom. Well, that's an island nation, right? So there's a limited amount of space there, and not a lot of resources in many respects. So what were the British doing? They were having to go out and colonize to keep up the wealth and power and they were good at this, right? But they were having to go out. And at one point in time, and I think it's still actually the case, if you take the Commonwealth as being the British Empire, they would say that the sun never set on the British Empire. And that was certainly true. And I think it may even still be true from a physical standpoint, if you include all of their commonwealths, that the sun never sets on the British Empire. But what made the United States far past Great Britain? Well, a lot of people say, well, we have lots of natural resources. Well, so does Brazil, actually, right? And if you went back to 1900, Brazil and the United States were in very similar positions economically. What led the United States to like Brazil, there's lots, think of all the stuff there. There's the rainforest, there's lots of hardwood, there's lots of space to grow stuff. Mexico has lots of natural resources, lots of, biodiversity, and things like that. Why is it that we advanced much further? And again, if you went back to the 1850s, the United States and Mexico were on relatively equal economic terms. Well, it's not just that you have these natural resources, but that you have the ability to convert these natural resources in a competitive advantage. What kinds of things lead to a competitive advantage? Why is it that we were able to convert these natural resources? Well, we started promoting at an early age, at an early time in our development, free public education, which means that you have a sophisticated group of domestic consumers who are also a sophisticated group of workers that can help produce things. You had related and supporting industries and synergies between the suppliers and producers as a result of this. So during the Industrial Revolution, there was just sort of this kind of nice synergistic thing that happened between, we had all of this iron that we could turn into steel, and that allowed us to manufacture the Model T in cars, right? So there's all of this ability, and there are these industries that form that start allowing for sort of a symbiotic relationship between suppliers and producers. Company strategies that allow, so you have a national regulatory environment that produces and allows for competition. We early on started disallowing monopolies in this country, and so we had competition in the form of businesses that can compete. This was not necessarily the case. And if you go to Mexico today, for example, their cell phone industry, one of the wealthiest men in the world is a guy named Carlos Slim, and he owns all of the telecommunications for the most part, or did until recently, in Mexico. There's far fewer cell providers and things like that allow for that. So this structure and rivalry, this capitalistic environment has allowed for a boom in the U.S. economy. Largely what you had in many of these other countries that had similar positions in 1900 as the United States was they still had, for example, rather than a capitalistic system, they still had very much sort of a feudal type system in many instances, where workers were largely held, down on in sort of a feudal type, a hacienda type system. So, and they didn't allow for much competition. The strong people in government and business sort of allowed for monopolies. So we had this anti-monopolistic competition that allowed us to develop in the United States, whereas other nations didn't necessarily have that. So what else have we seen in terms of globalization? We've seen a decline in protectionism. Now we've seen a slight uptick in this, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, but what is protectionism? What kinds of things can we do to protect our own suppliers, and why is that necessarily not a great thing? So historically, lots of nations were protectivist. You prevented other people from importing, and you protected your own manufacturers through a variety of means. The basic ones that you can use are tariffs, which are taxes on imports. So, for example, the European Union has a 10% tax on Japanese cars, which is 4 times the average. And I believe they still have that. Again, this may have changed since the text was written, because these things change quickly in a highly evolving, dynamic marketplace. You can also have quotas, which is pure restrictions on the amount of a product that's allowed to enter your country. So, for example, the U.S. used to have an import quota on sugar. Why did we do this? To produce or to protect U.S. sugar producers. Historically, how did you make sugar, and where did sugar come from? It came from the tropics, and you make it with sugar cane, right? Is that the only way you can make sugar? No, you can make sugar with beets, using sugar beets, right? Can you tell the difference as consumers? Now, CNH will have these ads at Christmas time and Thanksgiving that will come out, and they will attempt to tell you that there's a difference and you should use pure cane sugar. The average consumer can't tell the difference between pure cane sugar. So we have this sugar quota that only allowed certain much, and it cost about $3 billion to U.S. consumers. So formal integration of the global market. There was a predecessor to the WTO. It's now the WTO because of that 90% of global trade among the members. And if you have a dispute, it goes to an arbitration panel at the WTO. We're starting to see some of these globalizations break apart. For example, the Trump administration came in and said, we're going to do away with NAFTA. I'm not sure the president really understood the way treaties work. You can't just do that. It's not a unilateral, you can't just pull out, right? And from a practical standpoint, you can't just do that. So he's renamed it the USMCA or something like that. It's basically NAFTA. with a few bells and whistles and a few concessions that we wrung out of the Canadians, but it's still there. The Asia Free Trade Agreement, well, we have seen a slight reduction in these. So for example, in the European Union, you had the British that have left the European Union. They've had the exit. I will almost guarantee you that they will negotiate trade deals with the union that basically resemble what they had before, right? I mean, because it's just, they're far too integrated to just absolutely do away with it. Although it has impacted, for example, lots and lots and lots of British citizens have moved to France, and because they could move back and forth easily, and lots of European citizens have moved to Great Britain. And I can guarantee you that they will come up with something probably mostly to the detriment of the British as a result, because they will have all of the trade agreements, but they will have no representation that they used to have in the European Parliament. Of course, the British were the least integrated of the EU members because they didn't use the euro. They maintained their own currency, which is called the pound sterling. So, global competition. If you're going to engage in global trade, there are a number of ways that you can do this. So, global competition, firms produce and market products worldwide. This is true of automobiles, pharmaceuticals, apparel, electronics, aerospace, telecom, services, accounting, finance, communication services. All of those are marketed on the global spectrum. There are different types of global companies that you can have. We'll talk about entry strategies as well. So what kinds of global companies can you have? Well, you can have international firms. They engage in trade in different companies with marketing similar to their home country. So for example, Avon markets the same sort of products that they have in the United States and Asia, Europe, and South America. Now, what can be problematic about that? What does Avon manufacture?
Makeup.
They manufacture makeup, and what could be problematic about their manufacturing makeup and selling it in Asia and South America and Europe the same way that they sell it in the United States?
It may not fit with their regulations.
Okay, that's one thing that it could be. So products can be regulated differently, and in fact, for example, one of the things that I buy, so I like slather. I spend a lot of time at the lake. Until recently, I had 4 boats. I sold one, but I don't want to age prematurely. So I spend an enormous amount of time slathering sunscreen on my face and the rest of my body. The Japanese have actually come out with better sunscreens than we can get in the United States. And so I import my sunscreen because they are really, really avid users of sunscreen. The products that are used in that sunscreen have not been FDA approved in the United States. Now, they've been around for 20 years and they work really well, and you can import them, but they're not approved in the United States under the FDA, so they don't market them directly. You have to get them through suppliers in Japan who will then sell them into the United States, but you can't go to the store and get them into the United States. Some other problems with marketing Avon, historically, who have the cosmetic manufacturers like Avon marketed for? Well, they've marketed for light-skinned people. If you're going to market internationally, this could be problematic because not everybody has light skin, right? So then you could have multinational firms which view the world as consisting of unique parts, and they try to market differently to each of those constituency parts, right? Then you could have transnational firms that view the world as one market, and they standardize where there are similarities for global marketing strategy. So, for example, global consumers. There is emerging a global middle class who all have similar sort of needs and things. And with regard to financial products, communication products, things like that, you can market to these people very, very similarly, right? But there are still big differences, and you have to sort of recognize that. So what things play an important role in this global marketing? Well, we have to engage in a global environmental scan, and one of those that becomes enormously important is culture. So what is culture? We've talked about this when we talked about the environmental scan. It's the values, for example, that a society has, their preferred method of conducting business. So for example, I put up here McDonald's in India. Cows are sacred in India, right? So they don't manufacture beef hamburgers in India. Customs, the normal way of doing things. So if you're going to go into another country, it's important to understand the culture, the customs, and the values that they have, and the way that they normally do things. So the example I give here is when KFC decided that they were going to go into Japan. I don't know how Kentucky Fried Chicken ever decided that Japan would be an attractive market for them, but at one point in time, they decided that they were going to go into Japan, and I think they've been somewhat successful. I am sort of disappointed because I really did actually like Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think they generally have better chicken than some of the other places. And we used to have a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Guthrie, but it's since gone out of business, and we don't have Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. But KFC decided they wanted to go into business in Japan. Again, this seems to me like this is not a natural fit because Japanese food is real different but they work, right? They made it work. But when they decided they were going to go into Japan, they had to do things differently than they did. And I used to show a video in class of this, and I used to show it in my global or my international marketing class. So if you want to open a business, let's say you want to open a KFC in Guthrie, right? So we no longer have a KFC. It's gone out. I think it went out because it was in a really bad location in Guthrie. It was not on one of the interstates. So there are two exits in Guthrie. There's a south exit, and there's really not much developed around that south exit because of the topography there. It's a difficult area. It's not, you can't see things from the interstate easily. It's also not an easy on and off, and for many years there was no way to get off at the first Guthrie exit and get back on going northbound. And if you do that now to this day, it's difficult. You get off going southbound, and you have to go quite a ways down to a light to make a U-turn and get back on. So there's not a lot of development. There are some car dealers there at the south exit of Guthrie. So most of the fast food development in Guthrie has been at the north Guthrie exit, which has a far more, and I'm going to put the phone down so I can use my hands, sort of broad, view. When you come up and you see the north exit, you can see for a much greater distance. It's more open, and the interchange there is a much more traditional interchange. So the South Guthrie exit, because there wasn't a traditional interchange going back northbound there, they had to build this bridge that kind of goes up. This is where I'm using my hand gestures. It kind of goes up and kind of in a crazy way and back around off to the north because they didn't sort of plan well at that interchange initially. The other entrance is much more traditional. You get off and you can get on both ways in a sort of a straight path, right? So it's much more conducive towards economic development of fast food. Well, if I decided, Guthrie needs a Kentucky Fried Chicken because I love Kentucky Fried Chicken and it's gone out. The old Kentucky Fried Chicken was on way in town, kind of off the beaten path from where tourists and people that are traveling through would stop. But there's now some land that's been developed there, and I decided I'm going to put in a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Right. So at that exit, that north exit, there are two loves, one on each side of the north side of the main highway that runs through Guthrie. I didn't know that we needed two loves at that spot, but apparently we do. We've got a big loves for truckers and everybody on the east side, and the smaller loves on the west side. And that smaller loves has a Subway in it. The bigger loves has a Carl's Jr. Across the interstate south from that big loves, they have a Golden Chick, and I can assure you that Golden Chick is far inferior product, although it is superior to what? Chick-fil-A. Absolutely superior to Chick-fil-A, inferior to God-given Kentucky Fried Chicken. By the way, my grandmother actually knew Colonel Sanders. He wasn't a real colonel. She was from Kentucky. He was from London, and he sold chicken out of the back of basically his car, his fried chicken. That's how he started. He wasn't a real colonel. He was what's called a Kentucky colonel, which is the governor of the state can make you sort of an aide de camp, and it's an honorary deal. My father, who was an FBI agent in New Mexico, has been made a New Mexico colonel by almost every governor that when he was the special agent in charge there, and that was in office the entire time he was there. So he's got all of these certificates, you know, colonel, aide de camp of so-and-so of the state of New Mexico. So that's what Colonel Sanders was. He wasn't a real colonel. But he did come up with good chicken, right? I mean, he's got really, really good chicken, even probably better than Popeye's chicken, I don't know. But so I decided I'm going to put it in my Kentucky Fried Chicken. On the west side, there's a Sonic, and there's a Brahms, and then there's a local Mexican restaurant, and there's this place called Missy's Donuts. So there's all these little food places around there. Well, if I decide I'm going to put in my Kentucky Fried Chicken, I can just pop up my store, right? I can just like put in my, get my building permits and do that. Well, you can't do that in Japan. When Kentucky Fried Chicken decided to go to Japan, what they found out is that the culture required that you ask permission from the local businesses and even your competitors. That would be very anti-American, right? I'm not going to go ask Subway if I can put in a Kentucky Fried, screw those guys. I'm going to do what I want. That's not the way it works. So they had to go through and they had to go to each business and ask if they could put a store in that location. And then they had to invite everybody in the neighborhood when they had the store opening. And by invite, it's not put out, in the United States, we put up one of those wavy things that I don't know what they are, that's blown up by a machine, or maybe a big gorilla. I don't know what gorillas have to do with selling cars, but they seem to put up these gorillas and these wavy things when they open a new car dealership. And you put up banners and lights and stuff like that, and you'd attract customers. You have to actually formally go and ask people if to come to your grand opening. And then once you open, it's important to observe the culture. So in Japan, and they talk about this in the video that I used to show, workers don't say I work for KFC. They say I belong to KFC. It's a long-term relationship. And you don't just, in America, how is fast food served? Well, you get some kids that are high school aged, and you get them to, try to not burn their fingers off in the deep fat fryer, and they throw the chicken into a bucket, and they kind of pitch it out the window at you, right? You see go to McDonald's and look at the images that they have of the burger on the menu, and look at what you actually get. Right? There are entire websites that are dedicated to this sort of disparity between the idealized image that they portray and what you get. In Japan, it's important that it match that. And so even the way they hand you the bag is important. You don't just throw the bag at the customer. You hand it to them with both hands, and you thank them. And there's a certain way that you fold the bag down. It's not just, here's your food, order number 57. It's one of the reasons why I kind of like Five Guys. The burger at Five Guys actually kind of looks like what a burger should look like when it comes out. Now, of course, you pay a lot more than you do for a burger at McDonald's, but those kinds of cultural norms are important if you're going to do business in another country. Symbols become enormously important to people. What is the symbol of MGM? Anybody know?
It's the lion, right?
It's the lion, yes, it's the lion. Very good. You knew that off the top of your head. You get another duck. So the lion is the symbol of MGM. When they decided to open a casino in Las Vegas, the entrance to the casino was a gigantic lion's head. So you entered the casino in through this lion's head. In China has now got literally thousands and thousands of millionaires, right? This emerging global middle class. And of course, one of the places that they want to come and visit is the United States. And one of the places that people want to visit, there are some places that are at the top. Historically speaking, the number one place that everybody from out of the country wanted to visit when they came to the United States, forever and ever, the number one pick was
Las Vegas.
Disneyland. right? But Vegas was on the top 10. It's always been on the top 10. I don't know if Disneyland is still on the top of the list, but forever, for like 20 years, Disneyland was the #1 place that people wanted to come visit. It's enormously unlucky to go through the mouth of a lion, I'm told, in China. And so if they wanted to attract those people and to get them to come to the casino, which they do, they had to change and alter the entrance to the MGM Grand. You no longer go through this enormously big lion to get into the MGM. Language, so translating things and using a second interpreter. So translating things into another language and then using another interpreter to translate it back so that you're sure that you're getting the meaning that you want. Some examples of this. So for example, in English and in other nations and other languages, we don't necessarily have the same number of adjectives and adverbs that we have. So for example, in French, the word for evil, mal, can mean bad in a very ordinary sense of the word. In French, if you say, I have a headache, it's j'ai mal à la tête. It doesn't mean you have evil in your head. It means that you have a headache, right? So getting that and understanding that, we say, for example, that we love things in this country. And we say that word, and in other nations and in other countries, for example, in Greek and in Spanish and stuff like that, they would never say things like, I love, the way I love chicken McNuggets. I don't, really. They're kind of disgusting products, actually. And if you watched how they were made, you might not like chicken McNuggets either. They did this experiment where they showed children, they asked like third graders, do you like chicken McNuggets? And all, I like chicken McNuggets, yes. They did this, they showed, in Britain, they asked these kids the same question, they all love chicken McNuggets. In the United States, the little third graders also, they love chicken McNuggets. And the chef said, okay, I'm gonna show you what it takes to make a chicken McNugget. So they took a whole chicken, and they're carving off like the breast, and they're like, okay, this is not gonna go into the chicken McNugget because that's far too valuable a part, and the wings and the thighs. And basically what you're left with is this carcass, and then they put it in a pressure cooker, and they basically boil all of the stuff off the carcass. And of course, then you've got these little bits, and it's not like white meat, and then they have to put some stuff to make it like get back together. So it's basically a chicken loaf, right? It's chicken meat kind of product, sort of, like not really, but maybe. And by the time they got through with this experiment, the kids in Germany, or the kids in Great Britain, wouldn't eat the chicken McNugget. The kids in America were all disgusted, but they all ate the chicken McNugget, right? So, it's learning to understand these kinds of things are important. Preference for one's own national products is an understanding that cultural ethnocentricity that you may encounter in other places, and how to overcome that. Economic considerations, the stages of development. So 86% of the world is still developing. They're not a developed nation. What does that mean? You have to think about the infrastructure that they have, transportation, financial distribution. So for example, in the United States, how do we deliver Coca-Cola to convenience stores and restaurants and bars and every place else that gets Coca-Cola? Well, they largely come in large, what?
You truck them in.
Yeah, you truck them in, absolutely. You truck them in by semi-trucks, even to convenience stores. You'll see them delivering your Coca-Cola in these big tractor trailer rigs, right? In India, so this works really well in the United States because particularly when you get off the East Coast and into the vast western part of the United States, how is it that we've planned out communities? Well, Oklahoma is a good example of how we planned out a state very, very well. We start at the Indian Meridian, and that's our starting point, and you either go east or west and then north or south from a starting point, and everything is laid out in a grid. So what are the grids in Oklahoma? They're mile sections. So a mile by a mile is a section of land. Part of my family owns a section of land up in Guthrie that's 640 acres, right? That's a mile by a mile. And it makes it really nice to plan things like streets and roads. And it allows you to plan streets and roads that are fairly wide, right? And it works really, really well in places like Oklahoma where we don't have huge mountains. to overcome. But in other places, in other parts of the world, they don't plan that way, and communities sort of built up, and you've got narrow streets. When I was a foreign exchange student in Germany, you know, like there were lots of streets where they said they were two-way, and I have no idea. Like, I drive a Dodge Ram 3500 dually. There was not going to be one way with that vehicle down many of the streets in Germany. And so how do they get, for example, Coca-Cola around in India and outside the big cities? They get it delivered by motorcycle, by people carrying crates of Coca-Colas on motorcycles. So thinking about these infrastructure issues, the consumer purchasing power. So for example, I talked about this before, McDonald's in Russia. That's a big deal. Consumers don't have the purchasing power that they have in the United States. There are still lines. I have one student who's married to a Russian in my first class, and she said to this day in Russia, there are still lines that wrap around the McDonald's in Moscow, because that's a huge deal. Thinking about currency and exchange rates, and I am out of time, so we will stop there. I will mark that down, currency exchange rates on the global finance scan. Again, on Tuesday, watch the video, and then on Thursday, we will pick up, we'll finish this, and I will have to do like Sherman marching to Atlanta, I suppose, to get us caught up. So on Tuesday, again, no face-to-face or streaming class. It will be a totally virtual class. And you will watch the segmenting, targeting, and positioning. All right, let me stop this. So again, no class on Tuesday live. Still have class, just virtual. In the screen.